It's now time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, cyber attacks have posed a growing challenge to national security for countries everywhere, with a constant barrage of virtual offensives by actors ranging from states to hackers groups to individuals. Now, this is forcing countries to respond proactively and develop ways to address new unprecedented tactics that are evolving by the day with technology. Now, cybersecurity is one of the issues being highlighted at the World Emerging Security Forum 2022, organised by South Korea's Foreign Ministry this week. And our guest today is Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel, who published a new book, Searching for Peace, a Memoir of Israel, this year. And he is currently in Seoul to attend the forum and joins us virtually. Very warm welcome to you, Prime Minister. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
I'm delighted. Good morning.
Good morning. And, well, you're taking part in the World Emerging Security Forum being organised by Seoul's Foreign Ministry this week. And, well, first of all, how have you been enjoying your time in Seoul?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So how have you been enjoying your time in Seoul?
Well, very much so. Well, to be honest, this is not my first time in Seoul. I've been here many times before I was Prime Minister in Israel, after I was Prime Minister in Israel, and I always like to come here. And particularly at this time of the year, the weather is beautiful, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And also, I think that the conference deals with some very interesting and very important subjects, which I hope that Israel has some experience that can add to this discussion.
Right, so it's been a very highly anticipated summit forum, of course. But before we get to the forum here in Seoul, I want to talk about back in your country, in Israel, the weakened coalition government. It said that it plans to dissolve parliament and call new elections. And this has, of course, raised the question of whether certain individuals like former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be seeking a return to power, or whether this will bring about prolonged uncertainty in the Israeli parliament. So I want to know what your outlook is on this.
Well, the truth is that we suffer from instability for extended period of time. It will be sometimes towards the end of this year, and this will be the fifth general election in 3 years. So it's quite unusual. I mean, historically, it never happened before. And I think what it proved is that there is certain impasse. The two different political factions there, what is generally called the right wing and what is generally called the left wing, are more or less the same. And therefore, it's very hard to reach a conclusive outcome for these elections. What happened is that the former Prime Minister Netanyahu failed 4 times in trying to achieve a majority of 1 that would allow him to form a new coalition. And but at the same time, the last coalition was a very rare political creation, quite unusual. The parties on the right wing and some small parties on the left wing, including an Arab Islamic radical party that took part in the coalition. Now, one thing I think is of great consequence, which I want to share with you, and this is the first time in the history of the State of Israel that an Arab party, not just an Arab party, but an extremist Islamic party, joined a coalition which comprised mostly of right-wing parties. And this is a revolution, nothing less than a revolution in terms of the dynamics and the interactions of Israeli politics. And it opened the way for the first time for the Arab population of Israel to become a central power in running the state of Israel. So, quite frankly, I don't know what will be the outcome of the elections. I very much hope that Lapid and Bennett and Gantz, the 3 heads of the present coalition, will prevail and will increase their power and influence and will be able to form a new coalition. But whoever wins these elections one fact remains, and this will change Israeli politics forever. And this is the first time that our party was part of the coalition. From now on, the Arabs will play a much greater and influential role in the day-to-day politics of the state of Israel, and this is something of great consequence.
Well, we will certainly have to see how the situation develops. Prime Minister, while coming back here to Seoul, the two-day World Emerging Security Forum, it's being held offline for the first time since the pandemic. And, well, how have the last 2 years really changed the concept of security? And also, how has South Korea's position also changed when it comes to these global discussions?
Well, look, on one hand, and this was the thrust of what I tried to share with the participants yesterday, the truth is that nothing fundamentally is new. Pandemics, they took place in the 21st century, in the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, and many hundreds of years before. Humanity suffered from pandemics throughout its existence in different volumes, but there were always pandemics. And therefore, in this in itself, there is nothing new. And the difference, I think, the change which took place is the global aspects of this pandemic. The global aspects is a result of the way we live. In 100 years ago, we were not flying on a daily basis with thousands of different flights from every corner of the world, and people were not moving from one place to the other. Now that they are moving, they are distributing everything, including the possible viruses that can spread the pandemics into places which were immune from it, in a way. So the question is, this is true about pandemics. It's true about almost everything else that we are discussing there. The cybersecurity and the threat of cybersecurity, the growing influence of the social networks, and the potential influence of fake news, which are spread almost without control across the world because of the free access to the social networks. So how can you deal with it? I think that what we have to bear in mind is that, again, talking about cyber, for instance, cyber is a more modern, more sophisticated, more developed, very technological system of spying, potentially spying on the parties, also on an individual basis and maybe also on a national basis. But countries were spying against each other, for generations and generations. Now they're spying with much more sophisticated means, which can be used in a very aggressive manner against other countries. So I think that it was said, I don't think that there were proofs, but it was said that, for instance, Russia intervened in the American elections, presidential elections in 2016, and to a large degree manipulated the poll stations and the voting results. I don't know if this is true or not, but in principle, I am aware, I know enough, being a former prime minister in Israel and knowing a little bit about the potential of cyber, that with cyber, you can get hold of systems in the other part of the world and influence the activity of these systems, the electoral systems, many other different systems that can impact the lives of people. So this is a certain war not with artillery or not with missiles, but with impact that can make a difference in the life of nations and in the ability of people in other countries to live their own way of life. So there are dangers, and the more that we are developed technologically, the danger are becoming greater, and possibly also less controlled or more difficult to be controlled by others. So what really do we need to be able to cope with it? We need, number one, and this I think is the greatest merit of this convention, we need international cooperation. We need leadership that will have the guts, that will have the firmness, that will have the determination to put this on the table of international agenda and to move enough international leaders to define rules for the use of these measures in a way that none will suffer beyond a reasonable and accepted proportion. And talking about it and presenting the dangers, the difficulties, the fears, and the damages which can be caused on a mutually, by the way. No, and the one that use it in an aggressive manner can be the target for an attack just as much. So it requires a leadership, determination by leadership to cooperate. And I must say that I very much congratulate the Korean government and my good friend, the Secretary of State, the Foreign Minister of Korea, Mr. Park Jin, to have initiated this conference and to have brought in people that are familiar with all the potential dangers and ramifications of these aspects and the urgent need to define rules to deal with it.
Exactly, and Foreign Minister Park Jin, of course, has really emphasized the role of this forum as well in addressing these new emerging security threats that you mentioned, particularly cyber security, of course, cyber threats that South Korea and Israel both face. And both countries are also geographically compromised. They have limited natural resources and they face security threats from their closest neighbors, of course. And they also rely on the United States for security. So amid all of this, amid these unfavorable conditions, how can countries like South Korea and Israel really cooperate to increase their capability in deterring both conventional threats and new security threats?
I always said years ago, when I first came here as a Minister of Industry and Trade, and I was in charge of the Israeli chief scientist, I said, and I proposed to Korean business people and to the Korean government representatives that I think Israel and Korea together can do a lot. I consider Korea to be one of the most sophisticated and successful industrial and economic countries in the world. You are doing unbelievable things and which turned you into one of the most powerful economies in the world. I think that Israel is quite successful. We are not as successful as you are, but we are quite successful in promoting high-tech and new innovations and developments in the areas of high-tech. And I think that if we will join forces, I think that there is a great chance that we will develop together the necessary means to increase the defensibility that is needed to deal with cyber and also the research and development in other areas which are discussed in this conference now with regard to the spread of pandemics and the possible research to try and defend, to find the necessary vaccines which can be very helpful in dealing with this. So I think that we have to create a certain cooperation, a body of mutual research and development that will be financed by both sides, guided by the governments, guided by the leaderships of our country to focus on some of these areas. And I think that with the joint ability of both your scientists and your experts and your industrial conglomerates and ours, there is a lot that can be done, and I hope that it will be done, and I hope that this conference perhaps will contribute to the creation of some joint bodies that will work together.
Of course, South Korea and Israel are both strong investors in R&D, of course, topping the world's rankings really when it comes to the share of GDP and research. And well, they also have a lot of potential for innovation as well. But seeing my last question to you, Prime Minister, seeing as you're here on the Korean Peninsula, how do you think South Korea should really defend itself against the growing nuclear and missile threat from North Korea?
Look, we face somewhat similar, not identical, but similar issue with Iran, which is trying to build a nuclear power, and that we are trying to stop it. Number one, and it's very important, I think that North Koreans know that South Korea is absolutely, entirely, 100% protected by the United States of America. Therefore, if you ask me, what is the probability that the North Koreans will try at any time in the future to use their set of weapons, nuclear and not nuclear, to attack South Korea? I think that this will cause their demise, and they know it better than most. So I'm not that much afraid if something will happen from today to tomorrow. What I'm concerned about with regard to North Korea is the very fact that they invest so much in the development of sophisticated weapons is a continuous threat that is hanging over the skies of South Korea and can affect the mood, the attitude of your population, and also that can force you to invest in areas which, under different circumstances, will not be necessary, and you could focus on dealing with problems which are serious and real for the good quality of life of your people. In any event, since cyber is definitely one of the measures in which maybe the North Koreans can use, I promise you that if we will cooperate, I mean, we means you, South Korea, and the State of Israel, in these areas, you will be in a better position to defend yourselves against such attacks coming from your neighbors, and that definitely will contribute to the security and the well-being and the quality of life of this great country of yours and the people that live here, who are peace-loving people.
So great potential there for collaboration and innovation between South Korea and Israel in addressing all these diverse security challenges ahead. That was Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you very much for being in Seoul and for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for hosting me.